Retraining of Racehorses is British horse racing's official charity for the welfare of racehorses who have retired from racing. These wonderful animals can put their intelligent minds to so many different pursuits. These are just some of them.
Well, hello everybody, and a very good evening to this second RoR virtual showcase. Tonight we'll be looking all about sourcing, assessment and early retraining, following on from the first session where we looked at a racehorse's life before retraining. Tonight we'll be looking at the sourcing options, how to assess and take part in the early retraining steps, and we'll be looking at three particular sections: where to find your former racehorse, what are the common ailments or issues that might affect your former racehorse, how to spot them, and finally look at some of the physical and temperamental elements that might help you on your journey. We'll say firstly a huge warm welcome, very warm welcome to our four panelists who join us this evening. So we're delighted to say Dr. Jenny Hall joins us. She's the RoR Head of Welfare, she's the chair of the FEI Veterinary Committee, and she's also the former Chief Veterinary Officer for the BHA. Jenny is a practicing veterinary surgeon, and before joining RoR, she worked for many years in equine practice, both with racehorses and training and at stud, and has also got a whole load of experience with non-thoroughbreds too. So brings lots of experience to this webinar. Philippa James, delighted that Philippa joins us. She's a qualified physio of over a decade, and she's worked with some of the top names in racing and eventing. Nikki Henderson at Seven Barrows is just one of those, and she's also helped the horses in the stables of Zara Tyndall and the up-and-coming event rider, Tom McEwen. Amanda Mills joins us. She's worked for racehorse trainers as well, including Sir Mark Prescott, Ian Williams, Pam Sly and Richard Lee. Her and her husband Matthew have a wealth of experience with racehorses, which enable them to help horses in every step of the transition from racehorse to riding horse. And last but not least, we welcome Jason Webb, our international flavour for tonight's webinar. Jason grew up down in New South Wales in Australia, and he grew up on a 4,000-acre sheep and cattle property. With a passion for racing, Jason's father, Doug, bred thoroughbreds for the local racetrack, and it wasn't rare for those horses to need retraining. As you can imagine, Jason's probably had to sit on horses of all temperaments, and that really has helped him to establish his base here in the UK, and that's at Risebridge Farm, where he helps horses with temperamental and behavioural problems, or those just needing settling into their new career. He helps with behavioural and ridden problems. So we welcome our four panelists. We say a very warm welcome to them once again. They'll be answering questions, but if you want to get involved, of course, that's the whole point of this series, to answer the questions that you have about retraining your own ex-racehorse. Any questions that you have, well, you can put them in the usual Q&A section. You'll find that link at the bottom of your screen, and I'll try and get to as many of those as possible a little bit later on in the webinar. For those of you who joined us for the first webinar with my colleague Nick Luck, you'll know how this works by now. We'll have quite a casual, informal chat on this Tuesday night. But before we get to the chats, we've got two videos to show you. We're first going to show you one of those. And this video is from Jenny and Philippa. And this one you can watch now.
So what are the options for finding a former racehorse? These are multiple because there's no prescribed pathway that former racehorses have to follow when they leave training in Britain. Some trainers, such as Lucinda Russell up in Scotland, have rehoming sites through their own websites. So they dedicate the resources in-house to rehoming their horses. Other large owners, such as Godolphin and Elite Racing, run rehoming programs themselves. Again, information on their websites. And there are, of course, the thoroughbred rehoming charities. You can find details of them on our website. Two options that I want to talk to you about in more detail are the Source a Horse advertising website and professional racehorse retrainers. Source a Horse is Retraining of Racehorses' own dedicated website for selling, buying or loaning of former racehorses. In addition to the options I've already mentioned, and one of the best, especially if this is your first time to have a former racehorse, is to find an established racehorse retrainer. There's a page on our website where these are listed, and Amanda Mills, who's joining us in this session, is one of these. Amanda's premises have the facilities available for trying a horse in an equestrian environment. A word of caution, We know that there's a strong demand for former racehorses at the moment, and this has led to many new retrainers popping up. It's not a regulated area or status, so please, if you're not sure, by all means give us a call in our office for guidance. So here we have our former National Hunt racehorse. He's 9 years old, he was bred in France, he's raced on the flat, over hurdles and over fences. He's not been out of training very long, so you can see how light he is because he was very fit. So obviously he was lean, in fit condition. But he also represents the kind of temporary gastrointestinal issues that are very frequent in former racehorses. We know that a large percentage of them have ulcers. This horse has been gastroscoped, he does have them, but that being underweight and being slow to gain weight is very typical in those first few months when horses are out of training. And also in his case, his teeth are in very poor condition, he's got a lot of sharp edges, a big problem with his bite at the back. So that's another reminder that when you first get a horse out of training, no matter really who's trained him, just make sure that he has a proper dental examination. Moving on to the veterinary exam, remember if you're having the horse vetted at the trainer's stables, often there won't be the facilities to carry out a 5-stage vetting as you'd expect in an equestrian environment. For example, there may not be anywhere to trot on the circle on the hard, as this wouldn't be done as part of everyday assessment in racing as it is in the equestrian veterinary world. Also, consider the practice caseload of the vet that you've asked to carry out the examination. The vet who will be monitoring the future health and care of your new horse may not be experienced in racehorse practice, and alternatively, veterinarians practicing primarily with racehorses may be offering opinions on suitability for careers in disciplines outside their normal patient population. Other common health issues with horses in training are musculoskeletal injuries and wind issues. This is where a conversation with the vet who will be advising you on your horse in the future will be helpful. The majority of tendon injuries sustained while in racing won't impact on the future ability of the horse to participate in almost all equestrian activities, as the intensity of strain on the tendon is not as extreme as in racing. Likewise, horses that have had wind surgery, if they've no complications as a result of that surgery, then it is unlikely to be an issue in the future.
Here we have a 9-year-old National Hunt horse, straight out of training. He has run 27 times in total, flat, hurdles and fences. So with National Hunt horses, they are usually a lighter frame and tend to look weaker overall, because obviously they tend to race over longer distances, so are sort of look more like marathon runners than sprinters. Sprinters obviously being the flat horses. So a National Hunt horse would almost have a sort of upside down neck to begin with. We'd be looking to build up the muscle here and lose some of this muscle here. So here I'm just running my hands down either side of the spine, just checking from any soreness. Obviously, when he starts his retraining, he's going to be ridden in a totally different saddle to what he would have been in training. And we have to make sure that he is sort of suitable and ready to go for that. National Hunt horses obviously use their hindquarters for jumping. So here he can, for a jumper, he is relatively well muscled through his glutes. But obviously for different disciplines, this sort of muscle would change. So having seen this guy walk up, he is clearly sound and ready to start his retraining program. Chasers tend to be, and hurdlers tend to be, go quite long and flat, which obviously for a show jumper would not be the same, would not be what would be desired. So for this particular horse, I'd recommend he has 3 or 4 weeks to settle in, and then you would gradually start his retraining program. Although he is race fit, he would not be half an hour in the school fit by a long way.
So a huge thank you to Jenny and Philippa for that video, and as always, thanks to everybody that helps to record those videos, and the horses, of course, that allow them to take part, to go ahead. Questions that we're going to give to our two experts now, Jenny and Philippa. These two questions each, we're going to go to them with, actually came in before this webinar. And just another reminder, if you do have a question of anything that pops up along the way, please do add them to the Q&A box, and I will try and get to as many as I can at the end of the webinar. So I think it was really important actually to start with that video, because Jenny and Philippa are two people which you will likely get involved or involve in your own sourcing journey when you first go to look for a new racehorse, ex-racehorse. Jenny obviously from the veterinary aspect, Philippa from the physio aspect. And Jenny mentioned in that video, so Jenny, I'll come to you now. You mentioned a couple of things which I thought were really interesting, but one of them which I know that is a real common problem in discussions with people that are competing as well, about stomach ulcers, gastric ulcers. Firstly, how common, I know you mentioned it is very common, how common is it, and how do you recommend diagnosing? Do you diagnose? Do you assume that they have them already? And basically just how do you approach the fact that a racehorse that has recently left training is likely to have this problem?
Well, Mark, as we said on the video, that horse had been gastroscoped. I mean, that was because the owner, his owner just wanted to have everything checked out. And I think what we didn't mention on the video is the first horse that you could see had also raced 27 times, but that was a horse that had only raced on the flat. That horse was a 5-year-old, whereas the National Hunt horse was a 9-year-old. But no, I don't recommend that every horse is gastroscoped, as soon as you get it out of training. I think there's been plenty of surveys done that document the fact that more than 70% of them will have ulcers. So you might as well just assume that they have. And when they first, and obviously they're moving home, there's a few things that are different. So what I would do, and especially if you're collecting your horse from a long distance, because we also know that transport creates ulcers as well. So certainly putting them on some anti-ulcer treatment for those initial few days. I mean, discuss it with your vet, and I know GastroGuard products like that are relatively expensive, but just for those first few days, they're obviously a lot cheaper than having to have a vet visit for colic, because the worst manifestation will be colic. And then you get the low-grade signs like the horse being maybe a bit sensitive about the leg, not liking the girth, not eating very well. But those, those are such non-specific signs that come with all the other changes, like having to wear a different saddle, different girth, So I think you've got to kind of get everything, give the horse a chance to get settled in, but feed him accordingly, plenty of forage, plenty of fibre. And I do think, it does take them a considerable amount of time to put the weight on and end up looking how you would want them to look as a horse doing something else. But equally, when they've been out of training for some time, former racehorses can equally have problems with being overweight, the same as the rest of the equine population. So, they will get there. You just have to kind of hang in there a bit.
And you touched on it there, actually, but in terms of anybody watching this that is thinking, I don't know, my horse is a little bit sensitive with the girth, or what, are there any specific symptoms or signs that you would say are sort of standard with this sort of problem that people can be aware of just generally, even after they've got their ex-racehorse and, they could be years down the line?
Yeah, well, I think there could be quite non-specific ulcer symptoms. Low-grade colic, looking around, not eating very well. Those are sort of typical things, I think, for any breed. But the other, I do think all this modern imaging technology, allows us to go straight to gastroscopy. But I think we do, again, as I mentioned on the video, we have to absolutely stick to the basics. The 9-year-old horse, when you first put your hand in his mouth, you would have said his teeth were in reasonable order, because he had bit seats. He didn't have any sharp edges on the teeth at the front. But when you looked in his mouth properly, when you put the speculum on, put the gag on, feel to the back of his mouth, his teeth were awful at the back. He had really big overgrowths and hooks. So, no wonder he didn't want to eat very well. So yes, he did have ulcers, but actually probably his inappetence was as much to do with his teeth. So that's another thing to put in the budget. is to, you know, have a good dental exam, but also the fact that the horse will need to be sedated for that dental exam in order for it to be carried out thoroughly. And the other kind of, you know, the things that we talk about with ulcers, like the horse, you know, not wanting to go forward, being resentful of the leg, those are all symptoms of the fact the horse isn't comfortable in his mouth either. So especially when, you know, in racing, they don't have tight nose bands, so they can probably cope, you know, they can cope with having a bit less perfect dentistry than they can in an equestrian career, really.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that, Jenny. And just one follow-up very quickly, actually, before we move on to your second question. You mentioned there the age difference in those two horses. Is there generally an age correlation with the ulcers? Do they get particularly worse in an older horse, or is it really something that reliable?
I think like with non, you know, they're common in leisure horses as well. Your horses, not, you know, not race horses. And no, I think they're quite unpredictable in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously the young horse, the yearling that's early in his training and he's been out, you know, he's been raised out in the paddock the whole time. Most of those really don't have ulcers. So, you know, when they've been in training for some extended period of time. But no, I don't think age gives you much help at all.
Brilliant, thank you. Just moving on then a little bit further down the horse's body to the back. Do you generally find former racehorses, this question that came in, do you find former racehorses have a higher incidence of back issues, and how would you recommend managing them from the early stages of finding your new horse?
Well, I'm not sure that they necessarily have a higher incidence of back issues than all horses, you know, but they certainly are common, but we know that they're common for all horses. One thing that I think, if you x-ray their backs, they will almost all have abnormalities on back x-rays. But a key point that I would like to share is that the x-rays don't necessarily bear any correlation to what the horse is comfortable to do and what he's able to do. So while they're interesting to have, they're not really going to help in terms of any sort of to give you any kind of predictive idea as to what might happen. I would say, you know, having someone like Philippa, you know, look at the horse with you is going to be more useful in assessing how comfortable the horse is. And there's lots of, you know, as you change tack, you change work, you know, you change everything about his life, his or her life, then, you know, it's going to take a period of adaptation for the horse to really be in a position to know what's going to be the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jenny. And that leads us in nicely, actually, to Philippa. So Philippa James, our resident physio on the panel. Philippa, can you speak to what Jenny was just talking about there in terms of the back, of course, and the issues that come with ex-racehorses? And what are the main issues that you encounter when you're out treating former racehorses early on in their retraining career?
Well, I think usually once I've given them the sort of first assessment before they start their retraining, and as long as that is, you know, I'm happy with them and think that they are able to move on to their first stage of their new career, it's usually the second or third sort of sessions that I actually find them a bit worse, where they've perhaps got a bit sore, they're using a different saddle, that they're not, you know, the racing saddles are so light, even the exercise ones at home are very light. So they can just, it's probably more muscle sore. They're not used to being ridden like in a contact, sort of ridden in a shape. You know, a lot of the lads would just perhaps have them on a long rein to and from the gallops, and then otherwise they're just cantering. And obviously they're going in a different frame, so they're trying to sort of push from behind rather than just pull themselves along in front with their shoulders. And then, say with the chasers in particular, when they first start show jumping or training for show jumping, they're used to sort of jumping quite long and flat, whereas you want them ideally to be much rounder. So it's just a total different way of going, but they're obviously incredibly trainable, but it does just take quite a lot of time.
You actually mentioned there the difference between the flattened jumps, and that's a question that I would certainly have in terms of from your scientific background and scientific experience, are you actually finding much in the way of difference physically between a horse that was a former 5 furlong sprinter and of course comparing to a chaser?
Yes, I'd say with a sprinter in particular, they're just much heavier in front, big shoulders, quite a thick neck, and don't really use their sort of back end as much. It's a lot more on the front end. Whereas then chasers, especially anything with perhaps an old injury, it's more likely from behind, and they're just a lot leaner. They're your marathon runners, whereas the flat horses are predominantly your more sort of sprinter type athletes.
Absolutely. In the video as well, you talked about the level of work an ex-racehorse is ready to begin and how soon they can go into doing different levels of work. One of the questions that we had come in was that when you get a fit horse out of training, so race not too long ago, are they muscle-wise ready to begin flat work lessons immediately? I think you've already answered that one as such. Just talk though, if you would, to how long and things that you would sort of be looking to avoid when you first get that racehorse home. I assume that you're saying we shouldn't expect them to go in the school and do, half an hour round in circles.
Yes, they just wouldn't be used to it. I mean, you could have one that had perhaps run in the Grand National a month or so before, over 4 miles, but he would not be ready to do 30 minutes in the school. It's just a total different way of going, a total different frame. And the same as sort of lunging, it would just have to be short and sweet sessions, just so that whilst their muscles are changing, they're going to be using different muscles that they haven't used before.
And how would you, sorry to interrupt.
Like I have my own racehorse out, he'd only run twice on the flat. I had him at 3, and he'd run, I think, 2 weeks before I had him. So I sort of gave him a couple of days when he first came in, and then was just going to sort of see how he was in the school. And, a couple of circuits around the school, just no circles or anything like that. And he was finding that quite hard. Whereas, he was fit to race, but not the same type of fitness for a school session.
Yeah, and would your advice be basically to take it on a case-by-case basis, or is there a sort of standard time frame that you could look at thinking that you can build up to half an hour in the school, or is it literally a case of working with your vet like Jenny and yourself and just determining it on a literal case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I think a case-by-case basis, because some would find it naturally easier. Some are built naturally to find it a bit easier, perhaps have a better shaped neck already. Even if they perhaps weren't a particularly good racehorse, they would actually find some of the flat work easier. But it would totally be case by case.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Philippa. Thank you also, Jenny. We'll come back to you a little bit later on in the session, but we're now going to go to the second of our videos. And this video takes things a little bit further now along the journey. So we've found our horse, we've had it vetted, it's met the physio. It's now time to look at the behavioural elements, getting it used to the stables at home, and of course, mounting.
This is Bombero. He is a 6-year-old gelding who has run 27 times. He last ran the end of September, and he came to us about a month ago to start his retraining. So when they do arrive with us, we will obviously give them a full check over, especially the horses that have come straight out of training. The majority of those they're all fit, healthy and ready to go. So unless we've got an issue or we've been told by the trainers that they need teeth doing, backs doing or anything like that, we will just leave them be at the time. And as the time goes on with our retraining, if we start to see a problem, that's when we will start looking into things and possibly get backs checked and stuff like that. So with Bombero, because he recently ran, we're going to crack on with his work now and see how he gets on. If, however, it looks like he does need a break as we're starting his training, then what we'll do, as we do with some of the others, we'll turn him away for a little while. It will be entirely dependent on how long the horse needs. So it could be a month, it could be 6 months, it could be absolutely longer, depending on what he needs. If if he needs a little rest for anything that crops up while we're doing the retraining with him. So the horses that have had a little break with us, they'll come back up to the main yard and we might pop them on the walker just for a week, just to enable them to get the idea that they are coming back into work again after having a little break. And then depending on the horse's temperament, if they are a little bit of a fresh type of horse, then we may pop them on the lunge, literally just for 5 minutes, give them a little stretch each way. We don't put any gadgets on them or anything like that, and it will only be at a trot. If they want to break into a canter, then that's fine to let the freshness out. But at this stage, we don't really do any hard lunging with them, simply because it's something that they haven't done since they were broken in as babies. So that will come a bit later in their retraining with us. So Bombero, because he's come straight from the trainer's yard, he still has his racing plates on. When he's due for his set of shoes, we will get the farrier out, and the important thing is to let the farrier have a look at the horse's feet and decide what he thinks they need. The majority of them will just need a standard set of shoes, but there are certain horses that they may be feeling a little bit soft, flat-footed and things like that. You have to bear all these things in mind with them. The horses are really well looked after when they're in training, and they'll be groomed daily, so they are used to being brushed. A lot of them, again, they won't get tied up. The stable staff will just go in and give them their brush off after they've done their work and allow them then to be let down. So a lot of these horses, they will quite enjoy just having somebody in there, giving them a good brush all over, a bit of a pamper session and little bits of trimming. They should come to you, especially if they've recently ran, looking very well. Their manes will be nicely pulled, their tails will be pulled, and the majority of them are great to clip. They're used to being clipped while they're in training. As with any horse, you get the odd few that isn't, but they do enjoy having that fuss and attention. When you have your racehorse straight out of training, they will be on a high protein diet, especially ones that have recently run. What you want to do is transition them off that diet and mainly just give them a fibre feed when you get them. And contact your local feed merchants. They will be able to direct you for the best feed for your horse. When you're kitting out your former racehorse for the first time, just start with a nice simple bridle. We have the Micklin bridle here with a snaffle bit and a GP saddle, nice pad, soft girth. And then we always put front boots on our horses as well, just because when we start them in a school, something different for them, just to stop them banging their front legs. If you need any help or advice with your former racehorse, then ask the professionals. That's what they're there for. Your vet, your farrier, your chiropractor, your dentist, they're all there. Your clients are there. They'll be there to help you. And you can also ring the RoR helpline.
So we've just popped the bridle on Sailor here, but I want to talk to you about getting on correctly. And when I say correctly, I mean safely. Now, I get on young horses and remedial horses for a living, and I'm going to show you how I get on every horse. So I've got my reins in what's called a bridge. So I've got a cross there, and it's like that. Now this allows me, when my hand's by my horse's neck, to rotate my wrist there. This rein is loose, so it allows Sailor here to bend into that flexion that I've been telling him or been teaching him about. Now you might be asking, why is this so important? Well, if you get on a horse and a dog jumps out of a bush from behind you, or your horse is really tense, or something goes wrong and they go to run off, buck, bolt, rear, anything like that, then having that ability to instantly, without having to change rein positions or anything like that, being able to bend your horse means that your horse comes around you and you're able to get this crossing of the hind leg, which means your horse can't do any of those flight behaviors that we try to avoid. It's a precautionary measure. It's about safety.
So thank you to Amanda and Jason for that video, and thank you to probably the real stars there as well, Bandero and Sailor. So we're going to go to Amanda now, and we're going to put the 2 questions, Amanda, which came into us for you before the webinar started. And the first of those is about the differences between sourcing your former racehorse from the racing trainer, so perhaps straight off the track, or buying one from somebody like yourself who's already done some retraining. You've already, you've taken the horse in the school, you've taken it a little bit further on in the journey. What are the key differences that people should be aware of?
I think realistically, if you're getting a horse from a trainer, you're kind of often going into the unknown, because although the racehorse trainers know what the horses are like when they're in training and have a really great idea of their temperament and attitude and what they may be used to, you still don't know what these horses are going to be enjoy doing, or how they're going to settle into places outside of the racing stables until you get them home. So they're more of a project horse for somebody from the trainers, which can come as a bit of a cheaper option for people as well, which is why quite a few people try to go down those lines sometimes. But realistically, you've got to, before you think about where you're going to source your former racehorse from, decide whether you're experienced enough to be able to go directly to a trainer to get a horse from them. You need to have a good network of people to support you and help you with the retraining, especially if you've never done anything like this before. It's something like where if you're breaking in a horse, but they already know a job, so you're completely changing things. So if you would never go and break in a horse, just be aware that this isn't just an easy fix with them. You've got to know what you're doing. And the trainers have rehomed some fabulous horses to people, and they're in some fabulous homes, but be realistic about what you want. If you know as well what you want the horse to do, then definitely go to a retrainer, because people like us, we match the homes to the right people. So people will contact us and say they want a dressage horse or a venter, something just to go out hacking on. And all the horses that we have, they're all retrained, so we know exactly what type of career they're going to suit. And if they've had injuries which would stop them going on to have competitive careers, then most of those will be the happy hacking horses for people. And I think they're the differences really. For the first time people that want an ex-racehorse, go to a retrainer so they can match you, and also let you know whether you're going to be a suitable person to take on an ex-racehorse. I think is a big thing to ask yourself.
Yeah, good advice there. And I think quite important as well for us to bring up while we're talking about this. As you mentioned, this year it's been a strange year, but lots of horses seem to be coming up for sale, not just thoroughbreds, ex-racehorses, but right across the board. Are you noticing a rise in, I don't know what the most tactful way to say it is, but obviously yourself, you've got lots of experience retraining these racehorses and selling them on, but there does seem to have been a surge, doesn't there, in, it wouldn't be the black market, but it would certainly be some questionable retrainers and some questionable people's now selling these horses.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite a lot, and quite a lot of them that appeared very quickly, I've also noticed seem to be disappearing very quickly. It's not as easy as you think, and especially when you don't know the background of these racehorses either. I mean, myself and Matt, we're very lucky. We worked in racing for many years, so we know all the routines that the horses have been through, from the moment they were born right up to the minute that they leave racing. As some of these retrainers, they pick up a nice horse that actually they're very lucky. They've got a real quiet gentleman of something, and they've turned him around quite quickly, made a very big profit off them, and then keep trying to bring these horses in. But it's not always that simple. And yeah, we keep ours for a period of time, depending on how long the horses need. So we know, as I'm seeing horses going into a yard and then they're retrained and out within 4 weeks. It doesn't happen like that.
And is there any way that you can, I mean, it's a bit like sort of spotting scammers generally, isn't it? But how do you, are there any things that we should be aware of, we should be looking out for in the way that they advertise, or anything that you can give us as tips to avoid this?
Yeah, well, I think definitely the social media is great now these days, because you can go on there and have a look and do some research on the people that you're going to look at. And also as well, there is nothing in place that says that, you know, you should go to these trainers because they know what they're doing. Apart from the RoR have their accredited trainers So go to them, have a look, stick with the people that actually, you know, come highly recommended. And yeah, it's the same with anything. There's other dealers that they know, yeah, they shouldn't be out there.
And I think good to mention as well, just once again, the Source a Horse tool that RoR provide is really useful. And as always, if you are concerned, you can call the RoR office. They know every single trainer, they know the good, the bad, the ugly, and people like Amanda as well. I'm sure she won't mind you contacting her professionally too for any extra advice. Amanda, another question for you. This is more now about, we've got the racehorse, the former racehorse home. We're very excited, but he's not settling in the stable. He's not settling in the yard. It seems to be a real problem. What are the reasons for this, and how on earth do we try and remedy it?
Yeah, you do see a lot of it, and a lot of people asking this kind of question, saying, you know, my horse isn't really settling into the yard. What do I do about it? And you've got to look at the bigger picture really as to why the horse isn't settling. And again, a lot of it all comes down to the routine. Racehorses have always had such a structured lifestyle, and so you take them out of that environment, and suddenly the whole world can be turned absolutely upside down. And so you've got to look at what you can do to settle them in. Different yards suit different horses. Some racehorses coming out of training, they won't suit a busy DIY yard where you've got people coming and going at all different times of the day. Feed times are so different, turning out, bringing in, it's completely upheaves everything they've ever known, and they can struggle with it. And the thing is, if the yard isn't working for your horse, then unfortunately sometimes you just have to look at the bigger picture and find another yard. You can't always change your horse to suit that yard. You're better off finding a suitable yard for your horse. And all different things, the type of feed that they're on, if they're not being fed accordingly to the different works that they're doing, if they're still on a high protein diet, get them on a fiber diet, so they're a lot less stressed about things. So many big changes for them. And I think, as discussed earlier with the ulcers and things, if we have a horse that comes into us, if it's a bit highly strung or it's got some vices, box walking or cribbing or anything like that, we'll very often just put them on a gastro, a supplement, and sometimes one of the natural calmers, and it just helps bring those stress levels down while you're trying to settle them into something. But yeah, you've just got to be aware of your surroundings for them and work with your horse and get to know the lifestyle that a racehorse has had. I think is the important thing. Then you begin to understand them.
Yeah, absolutely, Amanda, and that is very important. Jason, to you, and just before I give the questions which we've had sent in for us to you, just a reminder that Jason's video, you only saw a very small snippet there. It's all about mounting. It's titled Mounting, the actual full video. You can see it on the RoR website, and I really would honestly advise all of you to go and take some time out to have a look at that. Obviously not right now, but after this webinar is finished. Have a look at the video, because it sounds like quite a very basic thing that we all take for granted. But I think most of us can agree, we've all been there with one leg in an eye and another one halfway in the air somewhere acrobatic, and a horse has gone and taken off for the hills, and it's not a very pleasant experience. So mounting is extremely important, and obviously it's a really big issue, Jason. So thank you for addressing it, and that video is well worth a watch.
Thanks, Mark.
Your first question. What are the most common reasons that people ask for your help? You obviously have mentioned you look after remedial issues, behavioural issues. What are the most common reasons that you get asked to step in?
Well, I suppose we can start with mounting. And again, as Amanda was saying, you've got to think about what a racehorse's life is all about. And a lot of racehorses will be got on the move. So the jockeys get thrown up. So now they come into an equestrian yard and they're expected to stand by the mounting block, and it's different for them. So you have to understand that first, not get frustrated, and work through a process to teach them how to do that. Of which I've done that video for the RoR just to give people a bit of an idea on what to do. The other ones, I mean, I do get some trouble on the ground. Some horses are, get general excitement, I suppose, both on the ground and in the saddle. And on the ground, I think when you first get a racehorse, it's important just to, again, think about where they come from and use common sense, really. If you turn your racehorse that you've just got out into a field and you want to bring it back in, don't leave it out in the field and bring all the other horses in before you grab that horse. It's just simple little things like that can make a big difference while your horse is settling in. I mean, on the ground, there are some techniques which I use to help teach horses that they're not sort of to be trotting along, you know, ready to go off racing. They're just to follow you in and out of the yard, tying up and things like that. I have simple processes to help people deal with those problems. One of them, I do a leading exercise or a following exercise, which is like my 101. And you can't do it around the yard, but it's a great exercise just to start to teach your horse how to sort of, or about boundaries and about following you and staying with you. And that exercise is really simply getting if you've got a downpipe, sort of the size of a jump pole, put it in the crux of your arm. So it's sort of running across the front of you like that. And it gives you wings, I suppose. And this acts as a boundary. And if you're walking along, you just teach your horse to move around you. So you could imagine if I turn and walk 90 degrees to the right or to the left, this acts as a sort of a push and a block. And it teaches your horse to follow you and move around you instead of trying to push past you. I found that really useful for some groundwork. There's lots of other things you can do. In the saddle, the excitement side of things, it can be for a couple of different reasons. One is, you know, they want to go home or they want to get back to their horses because of the environment they've come out of. So you get that herding instinct. And it's important to understand that and maybe be a little careful how you just take off small chunks of that. So don't go off by yourself. If your horse is a little bit herd bound and worried about other horses, go with another rider for a while and just introduce them to that incrementally about coming away from other horses. And if you do find yourself getting really excited and you need your horse to sort of just stand and calm down, then small circles are a great compromise. So using one rein. So I've bought a little prop here. This is Woody.
Oh my God.
I use him for some of my little webinars that I do. So if you're riding, say, a horse and they get really excitable, if you pull them and try and hold them together, the head comes up and therefore adrenaline comes up. If you can just use one rein and direct them into a circle and just turn them around, what happens is, and it's what you saw in my mounting video, they go around and they can't engage to sort of run, but also you're dealing with weaker muscle groups. So they're more likely to submit and drop their head and therefore bring them down. It's not a fix, but it's a good management tool if you have a horse like that. The other thing, which was touched on earlier in this webinar, I hope I'm not going on too much, was contact. So horses, I think Philippa mentioned it, race horses, when you introduce contact, bearing in mind contact for them generally means go faster. So changing that can take some time, and it's something to consider. And I like to supple the front of the horse up, you know, with your other experts like physios and vets, just making sure your horse is good. But carrot stretches are great. And I use carrot stretches just with a bit. So teaching them that if they feel pressure, just to bend. So these are all static exercises just to soften your horse's neck. And if they respond to the bit by softening and bending, then they don't tend to start to feel, you know, the bit contact means I've got to go, they've got to tense up and really run off type thing. So teaching them to just relax the bit pressure So to the sides is quite easy, carrot stretches. Vertically, again, I would do this standing still, statically. And an exercise I like to use is I might lift my reins up like this, run my other hand down onto the horse's neck and just hold the reins there for a second. So there'll be a little bit of pressure on their mouth. They'll be standing still. And what I'm looking for is for the horse to just nod their head slightly like that to the bit pressure. When they nod their head slightly, I release. And that's starting to teach your horse to just relax to the pole. And so when you pick up the bit, it doesn't mean tense, it means drop. Like with all things, it takes time, and there's lots of techniques that you need to use, but that's just a couple. I could go on all day, really, but that's just a couple of little things that to do with your horse's physiology, and that can really help in terms of just getting them to relax.
I almost didn't want that to end, and kind of feel like it's appropriate anyway, having a hobby horse, because it is pantomime season. So I think we all enjoyed that. But as well as that, there was some really, really great advice and great tips. So thank you for those, Jason. We've got quite a few questions, so I'm probably just going to start to go through those if you guys are all settled in, ready to have some quick fire questions thrown at you. There's a few questions. There's also a couple of good discussion points actually raised. We'll try and get through as many as we can, and anything that we can't get through, we will try and answer away from this webinar. The first actually is coming to Jenny. How long after getting your ex-racer, having been fed a high fiber diet, should you be concerned if they are still not putting weight on as you would expect?
Well, it's going to take some time. I mean, I would expect it's going to take, several months, especially if you get a horse at this time of year, when it's cold and there's no quality in the grass if they're turned out. But what you need to do is make sure they're not losing more weight. So really keep an eye on their condition score. And the best way to do this is by handling the horse. Feel how much cover it's got over its ribs. That's the key point. I mean, you shouldn't be able to see the ribs, but these horses can still grow a coat, so they might be quite furry at this time of year. So make sure you actually feel over their ribs. And ideally, they'll have a reasonable bit of condition over them. But as I say, be patient. It will easily take 3 to 4 months and maybe 6 months before you get that condition back on to where they look like a horse that's not in hard fit training. You might just use something simple like a weight tape, or obviously the whole year girth on is a simple measure of that. But yeah, don't expect it to happen quickly. And of course, also, if you're seeing, you'll be seeing the horse every day, so you probably won't notice. Like if someone else sees it in 2 weeks' time, it might be obvious to them that it looks a bit better, because it's got to change all its muscle distribution as well. So it definitely will take time. And as I say, don't despair. It can easily take 6-8 months.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Lillian Bolus, I hope that's answered your question. Just trying to get as many in as we can, so we'll try and keep them as quick and punchy as we can. Louise Hockney has asked, and this one I think we'll start with Amanda. We might have to bring Jason in as well on this one. This Lady Louise has actually said in our videos, the horse that we showed has been nibbling hands, lead ropes, etc. She's having the same problem with her ex-racer, who is 3 years old, but she's also having problems with her horse still making faces, threatening to nip when she walks past the door. She's done lots of on-the-ground handling, and he rarely seems to enjoy pampering. Is there anything that you would advise as handling ex-race horses day in, day out that Louise could do?
Yeah, I mean, going to Bombero in the video, actually, he was just after a bit of attention, and I was more than willing to give him, which is why he's just playing about with me. He's eating on the lead rope and things like that. For him, it's just a bit of a comfort thing with him. So he's just quite happily standing there and chewing on that. And don't forget, you're saying it's a 3-year-old, so he's still very much a baby, and he probably is just after a bit of attention. But sometimes they don't know how to react to it. We have a lot of horses that come into us, and especially when we have horses that new people come and view them, and their initial thing is to put their ears back and put their head over the door with pulling a grumpy looking face. But that's not them. You know, it just takes time. They're not always used to the hustle and bustle of things going along, so they're a little bit more wondering what's going on a lot of the time. And so that is why they might just be, you know, the facial reactions that you're getting, and just ignore them a little bit. You know, they'll get over it. They will. Don't make too much of a big deal. And he's a baby, so he's going to want to be chewing on things a little bit.
Right.
But yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Louise. Hope that's answered that for you. Straight to Philippa. This is a question from Rachel Lunny. She said, is there any specific, or are there any specific exercises that can improve and build a top line for a young former racehorse?
I think if he's sort of relatively far into his retraining, then I'd probably advise lunging in something maybe like a Pessoa. I would probably go with some pole work, and just sort of having him going quite long and low, head sort of, you know, not sort of tied down, but just sort of relaxed over his back, just so that he's using those muscles correctly.
Great, good answer, good timing, good and punchy as well, and hope that's answered your question. This now one for Jason. Emily asks, she's got a 5-year-old ex-racehorse. He's off the track, he'd been off the track since January. She said she's found that every time they take a new route out hacking, or if they go to a new venue, for example, for a lesson, he's very unsettled, feels like he's going to explode. Is there anything that she can do to get him used to new places? But I guess this is a catch-22, because when he gets used to them, he's fine. But obviously when he's going somewhere new, he's not so much. Any advice you can give Emily?
It is difficult because, well, I can't see exactly what is happening, but if it's because he's getting excited, which is what we were talking about, if you're having to keep making progress, i.e. you can't sort of turn your horse around or anything like that, then I would suggest you have to sort of embrace that sort of movement. If you come against it and try and, you know, force them to walk, or, you know, get anxious and hold on to them, it can exacerbate the problem, and either make them more highly strung or start to stop and not go forward. So your body, how you're riding your horse is really important, how you're breathing. So being able to stay calm and being able to give and take the rein. So if you just hold fixed, your horse is either going to feel claustrophobic and bubble up more, or it's going to create other problems. But if you can just steady them and relax and just carry on that sort of way, steady, relax, keep breathing yourself, think into your horse, it can settle them. In terms of directing your horse, if they do stop, again, it comes back to just that one rein, just being able to turn and release and let them go forward just with one rein. That's a couple of things I can suggest.
Great. We've had a lot of questions on this topic, so I'm not going to name check anybody, but we've got at least sort of 4 or 5 of these. They all relate to crib biting and weaving. So I think basically the bulk of the questions asking whether it should be stopped, whether they should carry on, is there anything that they can do to stop it? I'm probably going to start with Amanda on this, if you can be fairly brief, because I'm going to probably also bring in Jason, and I'm going to finally then bring in Jenny, because I want to talk to something in terms of the actual physiological effect, hormonal effect, I suppose, of what happens when they're doing this. Amanda, any top tips do they let them carry on, or do they try and stop it?
We actually usually do just try and try and ease it off them, and we often find the horses that we have come in for us for retraining and things, if they do a lot of weaving or some windsucking when they come to us, quite often by the time they leave us, they're not doing it as much. And yeah, we will sometimes put a collar on them and having a fence out in the paddocks with the electric fencing round so that they can't do it on the fencing, and try and break the habit. And we don't really have any that get upset or worried because we're doing that to them at all. They don't seem to get more stressed, the ones I've had anyway, by us trying to stop the habit. And the weaving, it's usually around feed times or going out or things like that. And again, when they get used to our routine and stuff, they're usually, we tend to find that they pretty much stop it.
Okay. Jason, just about 30 seconds, anything to add to that?
No, I don't think you can really change horses that have those sort of stereotypies. And I agree with Amanda wholeheartedly. I would use a collar only on horses that it's having an impact on their physical gastro type stuff. But yeah.
And just back to Jenny, I know Amanda mentioned it then, in terms of, because I mean, I don't know whether I definitely read an article about this quite a long time ago about how it releases sort of the happy hormone, if you like, when they're doing these habits. And it's almost making them more stressed if you're stopping them, almost like a person smoking. How scientific, or what research or anything are you aware of, or what would your advice be from a veterinary perspective?
Yeah, there is quite a bit of research, and there's quite a bit of research into the genetic predisposition, and I think it's certainly something that's not been selected out particularly in thoroughbred horses. But I would totally endorse what Amanda said about looking at what, not putting the horse in a position that creates the weaving, because exactly, some horses, when they're waiting for meals or whatever. But I think with the crib biting, certainly there is some connection between that and stomach ulcers. So that might it might encourage you to either use some antacid treatment or do gastroscopy on a horse like that. But it is it's certainly, it can be hard to lose the behavior once they've got into the habit of doing it. But yeah, I think modern behavioural science would suggest that if they do these things, they really should be, it's better to let them carry on doing them. It is more stressful for the horse to force it to stop.
Okay, great.
Very often. Go on, sorry.
Go on.
No, I was just going to repeat again about, the change of environment will often change these behaviours.
Great, thank you very much, Jenny, and I hope that's answered. We had a number of questions about that, so hopefully that's answered that question. This is more of a discussion point, really. Actually, Rachel Corley's dropped us a note. She says, I worked in racing 10 years ago and have retrained a few horses to event, most of which I've kept for a very long time. I wanted another ex-racehorse to bring onto event this year, but sadly most trainers now specify that they're looking for a home for life for horses, despite not knowing whether they're actually going to settle into their new job of eventing, for example, in this instance. Wish more trainers would use appropriately skilled retrainers. I imagine that's hinting to you, Amanda, or be a little bit more realistic in terms of committing the horse to a forever home. Amanda, that's quite an interesting point, isn't it? Because obviously you don't really know whether you hope you're going to find a forever home, but the horse just might not settle in, and it may be better that they do move on to a more suitable home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we do the retraining first, so we know exactly what type of homes these horses want. And we don't know what they're going to want when they come to us. We can take a look at a horse and have a guess and say, oh, I think you're going to be suitable for that and that. And surprisingly, quite often, it's the complete opposite. So you just don't know, which is why if you specifically want a horse to do a job, go more along the lines of the retrainers. If you want a project and you're quite happy to do whatever the horse wants to do, then fine, there's nothing wrong with taking them from the trainer as long as you've got the experience. But if you don't then want to have that horse because it doesn't do the job you want, you are then responsible for making sure that that horse is then found the home responsibly, and it's not just passed along from pillar to post because it didn't do the job you wanted it to do. And I think that's why we won't sell any of ours as projects. We know what they want to do, we know where they're happy, and we find those homes for them. And yeah.
Great, thank you, Amanda, and thank you to Rachel Corley, who sent in that discussion point. Really good point to raise, and nicely answered there as well, Amanda. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour, so we are nearly out of time now. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you once again to our panellists who've joined us this evening, Dr. Jenny Hall, Amanda Mills, Philippa James, and Jason Webb. We hope you found this useful as well. And following on from this webinar, we'll play a couple of slides about where you're going to be able to find more information on RoR. You can find out more information, as we've discussed throughout this webinar, on the Source a Horse website, where you'll find sourcing options, including direct from racing yards, equine charities and retrainers. You can register with RoR at the website, ror.org.uk. You can access the email and helpline for more information. You can take part in training and educational programs, and you can also partake in competitions, including the annual championships as the pinnacle at Aintree. And finally, don't forget to join me tomorrow evening with another great panel. We've got Cara Hayward, David Morley, David Ingle, Daniel Bazzaro as well. We'll be looking at versatility and suitability and taking things a little bit further and looking at choosing the discipline and actually getting out competing with your ex-racehorse. Once again, a huge thank you to our panelists. We're really grateful and delighted to have them. But most of all, thank you to you guys and girls for watching, sending us your questions. And I do hope you can join me tomorrow evening for another panel at 7 p.m. And then the final panel session will be with Nick Luck on the 16th. So I'll see you tomorrow. Have a very good evening, whatever you're doing. I'll see you soon.